In our next session of film history on the Thursday, we looked at basically the film industry in America, so that's Hollywood. We really looked into Hollywood and how they developed the classic studio era in the 30s and 40s, or the Golden Age as it might have been called. The studio system was really efficient from what we learned. It could basically mass produce films like the Ford car. Everything was on a conveyor belt, so it was less of an art form, more of a source of entertainment, or like a product that people buy. That's something that's really becoming a business when they developed things like Poverty Row, and all the big companies rose up like Warner Brothers and Universal. So that was quite good to learn about. And basically what makes Hollywood so successful, key things being the adaptability. So they had a keen eye on competitors around the world. They knew exactly what to make to stay popular. They never got detached from the audiences, and it's been like that ever since, really. Although they went through that studio collapse in the late 50s and 60s before they took inspiration from the new wave, which is another thing we learned about. And although I've just finished film studies at A-level, it is always good to learn about film history, like I say. And I already knew quite a lot about Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard, so it's good to have a little heads up. That was enjoyable to learn, and how they broke up so many conventions as well, and even to this day things like that are done, like jump cuts and breaking the fourth wall and shooting into the sun. All these things which have been done so often we just take them for granted now, but they were only really done for the first time 40 years ago. So help from the French is another thing we looked at, as well as other cinema. We started to look at other cinema, which is German Expressionism. That was really interesting, because I'm into the whole art thing anyway, as an art student, and looking at the way they really made things over dramatic because of the trauma of World War I and the influence on culture that it had. I thought it was great how they kind of took it to a new level. Originally it wasn't quite so extreme with its painted backgrounds and spiky set designs and dramatic lighting to kind of reflect the inner turmoil of the characters. That was great, really moody lighting. One of my favourite films is expressionistic anyway, and that's Metropolis. So that was quite good to learn about. Although the film we looked at was one called The Cabinet of Caligari. Didn't see much of it, but definitely something I need to see. I can never see enough films. Yeah, that was a really good watch. Then we learned about other cinemas, stage 2, so Soviet cinema, and how they used film as a weapon, kind of like propaganda and all that, in the early 20th century, around 1916, I think the Russian Revolution was in October. So from there, things started to change in the East. Really interesting as well, since I'm a history student. That we looked here at collage and the way it juxtaposes imagery to create a kind of, to convey justice, or injustice rather. We looked at the social and political responsibility of the film industry at the time in Russia, and how meaning is produced through editing, and that's what collaging is, a kind of editing. The film we looked at was one called Battleship Potemkin, which I've heard so much about in media studies at A2, because we learn about films that the BBFC banned, and I heard of that one. Although it came out in 1925, wasn't even allowed to be seen by the public until the 60s or 50s. That was like a quarter of a century at least. They were that scared of communism, the Red Scare all over the world, and they had to silence it. But the scene on the steps definitely resonates with you, no matter how old it is. Seeing children get slaughtered by soldiers and stuff in such a robotic manner is always quite disturbing. Those kind of things that they use in films, all these films seem to have something in common, which is taking something which really resonates with you, like rather than just creating some loose concept and trying to work with that, trying to be original. Do you take something which really grabs you by the throat, like kidnapping in Rescued by Rover in the first week, and this week slaughter of innocent people? The kind of thing really always excites you. People always want a good story like that. And yeah, then we looked at the French New Wave, which I described before anyway, and how they broke so many of the conventions. So to finish off, we looked kind of at other cinemas. So surrealism in the late 1920s, which I'll have to look into more myself. Poetic realism in France in the 1930s. Some Japanese cinema in the 1930s, so like Ozu and Mizoguchi. I already have a kind of interest in Japanese cinema, but mainly in the 50s, around Kurosawa's time. Last year I did an extended project sort of thing based around Kurosawa and his films Seven Samurai, Ran, Throne of Blood, Kagemusha. Didn't look at all of them, but they were all, I've seen them all, so I'm interested in it. We also looked at, well, we also briefly touched on Italian neo-realism in the 1940s, post-World War II, and the ruins of the Blitz and the Allied invasions, and also Brazilian cinema novo in the 1960s. We basically ended by looking at other films as well by the Danish filmmakers and their manifesto on the 1990s movement by Lars von Trier and Thomas Vinterberg, and how they create this manifesto about handheld cameras and using non-professional actors, location shooting only ambient light, and only in colour. And we looked at this film called Celebration, or Festo, which I definitely have to check out as soon as possible because that was so interesting. And the fact it can be done so cheaply as well, that's something all independent filmmakers need to know, so me especially. Can't wait to see it.